You're listening to Puma Podcast.
Welcome to She Talks Peace, where powerful peace builders, especially women, share stories that spark real change. Hosted by Amina Rasul Bernardo, President of the Philippine Center for Islam and Democracy, this podcast brings voices from Southeast Asia to the Middle East, Africa, and beyond, exploring conflict, climate, education, equality, and peace through lived experience. Whether you are commuting or cooking, join us in learning from the courageous women and men working on the front lines of peace. Because when we talk peace, the world listens. Listen to She Talks Peace on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts.
Salam, salam. Welcome to She Talks Peace, the podcast that brings you the voices of peace builders, especially women from across the globe, advocates who dare to imagine and work for a more peaceful world. I'm Amina Rasul Bernardo here in Manila, and today's episode comes at a time of deep global turbulence. As we record this, the conflicts continue to rage in the Middle East, in Gaza, parts of Syria, and in Yemen, leaving in their wake devastation, displacement, and loss. Women and children bear the brunt of these wars, often suffering the most while being excluded from decision-making tables. Yet, in refugee camps, homes, and grassroots movements, women are holding families and communities together. They are negotiating peace, they are demanding justice, and creating spaces for healing. But the Middle East isn't the only region in crisis. Around the world, from Sudan to Ukraine, from Myanmar to Colombia, conflict and insecurity continue to threaten lives, democracy, and human rights. And in many of these places, women are not just victims. They are also leading change. Their voices, however, remain underrepresented in peace talks and in the political processes that shape post-conflict recovery. That is why the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, or the WPS agenda, is more relevant than ever. It reminds the world that peace is more sustainable when women are part of the process. But how do we turn this powerful idea, which has been there for the past 25 years at the UN, how do we turn this powerful idea into action on the ground? Today, I'm honored to welcome someone who has spent much of her life answering that very question and actually acting on the issue. Professor Ayesah Abubakar is a leading academic, peace builder, and advocate for women's rights. She started in the Philippines, particularly in Mindanao, and later moved her advocacy to Malaysia to join her husband, Professor Dr. Kamarul Zaman Askandar, lovingly known as Zam by her friends, who himself is a renowned peace advocate. Ayesah's work bridges the worlds of policy, grassroots activism, and research. She has been at the forefront of efforts to ensure that women are not just included, but are central to peace building in conflict areas. And as you, our dear viewers, know, Ayesah was also my constant co-host on She Talks Peace. From her role in shaping the discourse on the Bangsamoro peace process to mentoring young peace advocates in Malaysia, Professor Ayesah's work offers deep insights into how local leadership, especially by women, can influence national and even global peace efforts. In today's episode, we'll talk about her journey, the hard lessons from Mindanao, and how the WPS agenda can be a living, breathing framework for change, not just in Malaysia or Southeast Asia, but in every conflict affected region in the world. So stay with us because She Talks Peace starts now. Welcome, Professor Dr. Ayesa Abubakar.
Assalamualaikum, Amina. Thank you for welcoming me in our new series of She Talks Peace.
How does it feel to be an interviewee instead of an interviewer, Ayesa?
Precisely. It's a new, it's like phase 3, maybe, phase 3 of She Talks Peace. So, yeah, I'm quite anxious now because I know that you will be asking me difficult questions. The show. But again, thank you so much also for introducing me. Although I think many parts of that are not entirely true. But of
All
course,
true, all true.
all true. Okay. Yeah, but we will definitely share with our viewers today, some of my life lessons, as a scholar and practitioner in the field of peace building.
Ayesa, one of the reasons why I thought you should be interviewed is because as interviewers, we rarely talk about our own personal advocacies and work. And yours has been so rich because it covers Mindanao to Sabah to now Greater Malaysia and ASEAN. And it would be, I think, a crime if we didn't listen to your experiences and share it with our listeners. So, dear Ayesa, as a young girl who came from Mindanao, what inspired you to become a peace builder?
Yeah, that was really a long time ago when I was a young girl. I mean, but anyhow, yeah, I guess, let me start by saying that it was really the 2000 all-out war by former President Joseph Estrada, that triggered me and many of my colleagues, my friends, and whom you also all know, when we started the Young Moro Professionals Network back in 2001. 2000, and the all-out war was in 2001, and until 2001 then we were organizing ourselves in Manila with the Young Moro Professionals Network, the YMPN. So that was really a conscious effort among young Moro professionals then, to really be part of the peace process and the humanitarian and rehabilitation work, that needed to be done in our Bangsamoro region at that time. So that started for me, putting up YMPN. And later on, then I got involved in the Southeast Asian Conflict Studies Network, which was led by ZAM, by Kamarul Zaman Askandar. So I was, very fortunate that through that CCSN, that was when that I re-engineered myself, from being a development-oriented person. Then, I started learning the ropes of doing peace-building work, not only for Philippines, but also for Southeast Asian countries.
But Ayesa, what's your family also victimized by conflict? Is that part of the trigger for you to really focus on the peace process, on peace building?
Yeah. I was lucky, Amina, that, I most of my life, I lived in Manila because my family moved from Davao City to Manila, even in the early 1980s. So that's where I went to school. And of course, there were also times that I went back to Davao and also to Kidapawan, Cotabato, where I finished my high school. But then, of course, it cannot be denied that when you meet, and you go home to Mindanao, you meet your grandparents, your elders, your families, that's when the stories of, how it was during the martial law period, and even way back the martial law period, how was life, for the Magindanaos, during the wars, and even during the conflict in the 1970s. So, because of course I grew up in Manila, it took a long time to sink in that I was part of that, history, that my family has been part of the history of self-determination, not only conflict, but, all of our families have become part of that struggle for right to self-determination in the Philippines.
Yes, sometimes when those of us who belong to minority groups have careers or get educated in areas of the majority, our links with our roots weaken. And it takes a drastic event like our community, the community of our parents, when they get bombed or there's military action and we hear about all kinds of atrocities, that is actually what sort of shocks us and brings us back to our roots. In your particular case, what is the defining moment in your career that actually shaped your advocacy for women and peace?
Maybe not yet for women and peace, but as I mentioned, it was really the all-out war of year 2000 that made me, change my direction of what is it that I want to do. And at the time, I really wanted to go back, in fact, to Mindanao. From Manila, being a professional, I wanted to go back and help in the, and whatever are the problems in Mindanao at the time. I remember there was one incident that really made me understand, how it is to be misunderstood as a marginalized group in the Philippines. When during the time of the all-out war, I went actually to a bank in Makati City, and I was there doing some financial transaction, with a time deposit. I wasn't there just, to withdraw money, but I was arranging for my time deposit. Interestingly, the officers in the bank, the first things that they asked me were, so your last name is Abubakar. Do you happen to own Camp Abubakar? So why are you here in Manila? And of course, Camp Abubakar was very famous because that was the MILF, the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, that was overrun by the Philippine military at the time. So it was always on the news, in the newspapers at Camp Abubakar. So it was really, a surprise for me that people, associate me. And even though I'm a professional, just because of my name, then they associate me with, the conflict, and the camp in Mindanao. So that, all those small episodes, in how we interact with our friends in Manila, that also led to my realization, as you said, that the more that we become more sensitized with our identity and our future as a marginalized group in the Philippines.
Yeah. But in those days, Ariesa, women were still not so visible in the activist peace movements. In those days, women were still sort of support mechanisms, and although women were already organizing at the community level, they were not visible. It was later when young women like you started really quite aggressively making your voices heard. That's what I'm interested in, Ayesa. What was the defining moment that drove you to say, hey, we are crucial to the peace process? You better listen to us women. What made you do it, Ayesa?
I will try to answer this in two parts. First, during the time that we organized the YMPN, together with our friends, there was Jahan Mutin, Samira Gutok, and many others. I
All
guess
noisy women.
yes, exactly, Amina. At that time, I think we were not conscious at all that we were representing women's voices. What we were very sure of is that we need to be there. So when there are discussions, public forum, or meetings, anything about Mindanao, about the conflict and the peace process in Mindanao, we will be there. We will show up and then say anything that we want. And as you said, we need to be heard, but we were not conscious that as young women, all we know is that wherever there's an opportunity for us to be there and even to help, in some humanitarian issues, then we will be a default volunteer for that. Okay. The second part is when I really started becoming more like a professional peace builder was when I really came here in Malaysia and I became part of the Southeast Asian Conflict Studies Network. Although the CCSN is an academic network, we do a lot of research work, trainings, and advocacy work, not only in the Philippines but throughout the region. So I was very fortunate that I had that experience, doing advocacy work as well, not only for Mindanao, but also in Aceh, in southern Thailand, in many places in Indonesia. So that was really where I developed myself, to become a more scholar and practitioner. And the consciousness, with Women Peace Security Agenda actually started only when I became part of the ASEAN Women Peace Registry, where we were together and we started in Cebu in December 2018. So again, it was another phase of my development in peace building, but this time with the more conscious effort on being a female peace builder in that sense. So yeah, I'm still a work in progress. I think I cannot claim really that I'm an expert on WPS agenda, but one thing that helped me throughout my experience is that it was good that I started working in conflict affected areas in Mindanao, so I have had that experience. Then I went into scholarship research, and I was also doing slowly learning the ropes of doing training workshops on peace building. And then as of more recent, then I became more involved, as you said, trying to push for more policy oriented type of work and advocacy type of work throughout ASEAN.
Ayesa, when you were becoming quite active in the peace movement and supporting the peace process in Mindanao, and I was working on strengthening democracy in our communities, which meant supporting the peace process. That was 2001, right?
Yes.
And the WPS agenda, UN Security Resolution 1325, had just been approved, had just been passed unanimously by the UN Security Council. And I actually had no idea there was such a thing. But what was going on, I think, on the ground and at the national level is that people were just saying enough is enough. And the women especially came out in numbers to help the interfaith community establish peace zones, right? To declare schools as peace zones, to pressure both the Liberation Front and the military to respect communities, safeguard the mosque, the church. And I started seeing the two together, the activism that grew at the community level and 1325, the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, much, much later, when the Philippine government started talking about a national action plan for WPS. And that's when I realized, hey, this Security Resolution 1325 was really driven by people like you, Ayesa, and countless other women all over the world who said, enough! You cannot do this without us. And I guess the men at the UN finally realized, yeah, they're right. We need to get women at the table. So now, Ayesa, 25 years after, how do you think the implementation of the WPS agenda has progressed in ASEAN or even in Malaysia, although Malaysia is not conflict affected?
Okay. I think just, by hearing the stories that we both have, our life experience on understanding, or when did we both, realize WPS as something that is relevant to both of us, it just goes to tell you that when they started WPS, there was really, a lack of engagement, with,
Right.
with the women sector.
Right.
But then, we are also, pleasantly benefited by that WPS, because later on, then it became like a framework for us to strengthen our work. Yeah. So with that said, I think, it's only in the last 5 years that we can truly say that because of the more activities done by UN Women and other international organizations, and even countries that have been constantly funding WPS activities like Australia, United Kingdom, Canada, the US. I think this is really the time that we are reaping the benefits of WPS, because now we do have that support system. A lot of international organizations have this support system. If we all want to do activities related to WPS. In Malaysia, as you mentioned, while we do not have an armed conflict in Malaysia, there are actually many ways that WPS agenda is applicable to Malaysian society. Number one, Malaysia has been, successful, in fact, in becoming being the third party facilitator, mediator in the peace process in the Philippines. And despite of the lack of limelight and news, but there were actually a couple of women who were part of that third party facilitation, on the Malaysian side. I don't think also that the government agency were aware about WPS, but fortunately, there were some women who were involved in the third party facilitation. And then secondly, in terms of the peacekeeping mission, for quite some time Malaysia have been sending female peacekeepers,
Peacekeepers,
in many places. Although I think for the last 5 years they have stopped doing that. Thirdly, in terms of the actual, occurrences, daily life, how WPS is actually being practiced, I think we don't really have to look at the government agencies in terms of policies, because the policies are there. There is really a strong gender mainstreaming in all the government agencies. But at the same time, we do have a very strong women activism, in many parts of Malaysia, whether it's Kuala Lumpur, in Penang, in Kota Kinabalu, in Sarawak, or even in the rural areas. Just like in the Philippines, there is a high consciousness of civic mindedness among women, ordinary Malaysian women and youths. But it's just a matter of how to shape it, that will also be following WPS, because the kind of activism that is being done by a lot of the Malaysian women is really in terms of gender empowerment, being part of the political system, community leadership as well, and a lot of all these women interest groups. Not only in politics, but also in environment issues, in livelihood issues. I think, Malaysian women are doing quite all right. But of course, if we make use of WPS as a framework, I think it will further strengthen and develop Malaysian women. One example.
Actually, yeah, actually, yes, I'm really quite happy that Malaysia, who's chair of ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, their chair this year, will be holding a WPS summit in Kuala Lumpur. And Nurulisa Anwar, the daughter of Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, is leading the organizing of this. This is quite encouraging for those of us, you and me, who belong to the ASEAN Women for Peace Registry, because we have really been pushing quietly, right, Ayesa, for Malaysia to become a little bit more supportive of having an action plan on WPS. And it looks like, Ayesa, it's going to happen. But then, you and I, and Nurulisa and all of the women in Southeast Asia, in spite of the conflicts that we see around us, we are still lucky that we are in Southeast Asia, where the participation of women, whether it's in business or humanitarian work, politics, peace and security, women's participation is still accepted and in some areas actually encouraged. Now, you in Al-Bukhari, you have students who come from the Middle East. And our sisters in the Middle East and North Africa have a very different situation altogether. So let me ask you, Ayesa, what do your students tell you about the conflict in their countries? And are they happy with the progress or lack of progress in their countries?
Yeah. As you mentioned, Amina, I'm a lecturer here at Al-Bukhari International University, where almost 80%, I think 80% rather, of the student population are non-Malaysians. They come from different regions of Africa, of Asia, and Southeast Asia, of course, and then we have 20% who are Malaysian students. Okay, so for many of our students who come from the conflict areas like Sudan, you mentioned Sudan, Yemen, Myanmar, and many other parts of Asia, Afghanistan as well. We do have Afghans here, women and males. So they are all here. Yeah. So I think it's the general behavior that the students are here. They do appreciate the kind of life that they are enjoying here in Malaysia. And to their surprise, as you mentioned, if perhaps in their countries there is really less participation of women because of tradition and cultural practices, the patriarchy is really embedded in their culture and in their daily life, and they are and they are also trying to adjust and understand, and I guess it in a way appreciate how it is here in Malaysia, that Malaysia is not like other countries that are too conservative. We are very in a way we are a cosmopolitan country with a lot of not only races but also even ethnic groups, indigenous peoples. Malaysia actually is rich with indigenous peoples' cultures. So they're starting to understand that. So I guess that is one contribution that we give to them, with their experience as students. And then for some students who are from this conflict areas like Sudan, Yemen, Myanmar, I have to admit that sometimes we know that they are very sad about what's going on in their countries, and that there is the tendency for them to really try to find other opportunities, to that extent that they might not want to go home, but of course we have no choice but to send them home. So it's also a very uncomfortable situation that they are in, once that they have experienced life here in Malaysia. But then we do our best, to give them the kind of education that will hopefully allow them to get more opportunities. And as there is also this course that I teach on gender and development. Okay, so when they go through that course, that's also where I take the opportunity to emphasize about WPS. Yeah. And so it will be the first time for them to hear about WPS agenda, and how I also tell them, case studies, how this WPS is actually being practiced, not only in Malaysia, but, of course, the usual case studies, the best case studies would be in the Philippines, in Indonesia, where you actually have national action plans. So I do teach them these things, so that hopefully when they go home, then the more that especially the male students will be more conscious in practicing the WPS agenda.
Good job, Ayesa. Really good job. Getting, I wouldn't say influencing, but inspiring your students on WPS. But I remember we had a couple of episodes where we talked to your students who came from Gaza.
Yeah.
This was last year.
Yes, Basma.
And I remember the anger, the frustration that they felt because their families, their immediate families were affected. And the situation is worse now than it was last year. How are they doing, Ayesa? Are they, I can only imagine the desperation that they feel. How are they now translating this pent-up anger? Are they starting movements to call for more attention on Gaza? What are your young students from Gaza, Syria, and those other conflict-affected Middle East countries doing now, Ayesa? I'm sure that they're given space in Malaysia to express their aspirations for peace in their region, right?
Yeah, thank you for asking that, Amina. Malaysia is one of those countries that is very supportive of the Palestinian cause, and even here at Al-Bukhari International University, where we have, I think by this time, at least 20 Palestinian students, in various faculties. Yeah, and you'll be happy to know that Basma, whom we interviewed, has actually put up a student organization called like Palestinian Support Group. Okay. And the members of that Palestinian support group are not only Palestinians, but other students as well that are helping in the advocacy work for the Palestinian cause. I don't attribute this, on WPS and my course on gender development, because I think many of them have not gone to my course. But then, as I mentioned, generally the ecosystem here at AIU is very supportive of the Palestinian cause, and because the niche area of discipline of the university is also this concept of social business, trying to engage students to be social entrepreneurs, to think about not only solving social development issues and maybe conflict issues, but getting into business that can help and can contribute to social and solve social development problems. So because of that education that they are getting, then I guess the students are more motivated to really do something, with their advocacy work, and trying to find ways how to become social entrepreneurs or social business practitioners.
And I'm really happy to hear about Basma starting that group. And perhaps we can interview her again, Ayesa. Now,
Definitely.
Speaking about her generation, you are more in touch with them because you've got so many students who come from all over. What should this generation, peace advocates like Basma, what should they focus on that perhaps your generation of peace builders could not? Because this generation, Ayesa, to me, I don't speak their language. I don't understand their language. You probably do because you're closer to their generation. What do you think they should be focused on, Ayesa?
If I can recall the struggles that we had in the Young Moro Professionals Network, is that, we were doing endless fundraising. And
Ah,
of course, giving that money, to the people who need,
yeah.
help, humanitarian help in Mindanao. But it was, really constant fundraising. But then, and to some extent, we were successful. To some extent, it can be, very taxing. And then, of course, down the line, you realize that, you're not going to be sustainable if you just keep on
Right,
asking for money.
right.
Fortunately, because of this generation where they are very IT sophisticated, they are,
Ah,
you have a boom of all these media influencers, and you have all these um, livelihoods and businesses online now. That's how, it's a new economy, it's a new digital economy. And many of our students, not many, but I know some students, in fact, dabble as well into as part of this online economy. And because, as I mentioned, we have this education for social business, I think this is one opportunity, real opportunity for this generation. How to take advantage, okay, of their advocacy work, at the same time make full use of the digital economy, and
hmm.
hopefully they can be persuaded to go into more social business.
Sounds good to me. But just keep Bitcoin away from me because I have absolutely no idea what that is. And I'm not going to invest in anything that I don't understand. Now, Ayesa, before we close, if you could speak to your younger self, just starting out in this field, what would you say? What would your advice be to your younger self, Ayesa Abubakar?
Well, that's a heavy question. I never really thought about it until you
You're
asked
a
this.
teacher. You should be able to advise your younger self.
I guess, I'm quite lucky, Amina, that I have always said, despite the difficulties, of course, everybody have their own personal challenges. But yeah, I've been lucky that I've always, been a happy person. Recalling also when I was younger, despite of all the difficulties and challenges, I've always had this positive behavior. So to my younger self, I would just remind her that just continue being yourself and being happy, because that is one thing that will sustain you, further in life, being positive always, and being happy, and always being grateful, with people around you, that will always be there to listen to you and to support you in any way that they can.
Well, sometimes, Ayesa, what your advice to your younger self, sometimes I myself find that a little difficult to do.
Why
Right?
is
I
that?
look well because when I look at what's happening um, around us, pessimism always creeps in. But I guess that is a powerful advice that you're giving to stay focused, stay happy, and I guess that's the message, isn't this? Light keeps the dark away. So if you really try and keep the happiness in your life, sooner or later it drives away part of the anger. So that's powerful advice. Thank you for that, Ayesa. I will, although I'm old already, I will try and follow your
I mean,
your advice.
I think it's also good for the audience to understand that, yeah, this is actually an intergenerational talk.
Yes.
You belong to a generation that really had, that painful experience of being there in the conflict in Sulu. I knew that you grew up
Yeah.
at the height of the conflict. I didn't. My family was uprooted, and went away and went to Manila. But of course, when I go back to to Mindanao, then that's when I learn about the story. So because we have this, generation experience, and then that's how we are in a way have a more interesting take, on how we dealt with the conflict in the peace process. But then again, I think it's also good for younger people to understand that both of us took the chance, to really held on to our identity as Bangsamoro people and continued to do, more for our own communities as well, despite of all the challenges. So we hope that our younger Bangsamoro people and all the younger people who have been in the who are from the conflict affected areas will not lose hope, just like the two of us, whether they have experienced the conflict personally or maybe not, but the fact that they belong to this generation that have been affected by the conflict, I think that should inspire them to do more for their communities.
Dear listeners, that was Professor Ayesa Abubakar, a powerful voice for peace, inclusion, and justice. Her reflections remind us that peace isn't just negotiated at tables in capitals of countries. It's built in classrooms, community halls, and conversations like this one. As conflict and polarization continue to tear communities apart in many parts of the world, from the Middle East to Southeast Asia, women like Professor Dr. Ayesa Abubakar are proving that inclusive peace is not only possible, it's essential. Her work and the work of many like her in Mindanao, in Malaysia, and elsewhere show us that when women lead, peace lasts. The Women, Peace, and Security Agenda is not just a UN resolution. It's a daily struggle, a lived commitment, and a call to action. And as we've heard today, it's one that must be rooted in local realities and driven by women who know what's at stake. Thank you for joining us on She Talks Peace. If today's conversation moved you, please share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe, leave us a review, and help us keep amplifying the voices of women peace builders around the world. Until next time, stay strong, stay hopeful, and Dr. Ayesa will tell you, stay happy and keep talking peace.